I am Joshua, 28 years old, and my own mother threw my grandfather's final legacy into the trash to illegally mortgage my home. Before I tell you how her blind greed led straight to a pair of federal handcuffs, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. I want to know who is in my corner today. The funeral reception was finally winding down, and the house felt entirely too small for the sheer amount of fake sympathy crowding the living room. The air was thick, suffocating, really, smelling of stale lilies, overpriced catering that no one was actually eating, and my mother's overpowering designer perfume. I stood by the heavy oak double doors, watching the neighbors and distant relatives shuffle out into the chilly October afternoon. I had spent the last 3 hours doing exactly what I had done for the past 10 years of my life. Refilling crystal wine glasses, taking heavy winter coats, and remaining completely invisible in my own home. My grandfather, Nicholas, was the only man who ever truly saw me. He was the anchor of this family, the man who built a sprawling suburban estate from nothing but sweat and a modest hardware store. He was the one who taught me how to tie a necktie, how to shave, and most importantly, how to play chess. And now he was gone. I could still feel the agonizing weight of carrying his casket earlier that morning. My shoulder ached, but the pain in my chest was infinitely worse. When the last guest finally walked out, the silence that settled over the house was heavy and toxic. I turned around and approached my mother, Eleanor. She was sitting at the head of the massive mahogany dining table, her posture rigid and perfectly straight. She didn't look like a woman who had just buried her father-in-law. She looked like a CEO calculating a hostile takeover. She was already reviewing a thick property appraisal document with my older brother, Elijah. They were actively talking about bulldozing Grandpa's award-winning rose garden to put in a heated swimming pool and a massive outdoor kitchen. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing heart. "Mom," I said, keeping my voice quiet and deferential, the way she always demanded. I was wondering if I could have Grandpa's chess book, the leather-bound one on the mantel. He taught me how to play with it. It's the only thing of his I really want. Eleanor stopped tracing her manicured finger over the appraisal numbers. She looked up at me, her expression immediately souring. Her jaw tightened, annoyed that the help was speaking without permission. She stood up, smoothing the front of her expensive black morning dress, walked over to the stone fireplace, and grabbed the heavy, worn leather book. For a split second, my heart leaped. I actually thought she was going to hand it to me. I reached my hand out, ready to receive the only tangible memory I had left of the man who raised me. Instead, she sneered, her top lip curling in absolute disgust. "This dusty thing smells like a retirement home and cheap cigars," she said, her voice dripping with venom. She didn't walk back to the table. She walked straight over to the stainless steel kitchen waste bin, stepped on the pedal, and dropped the heavy book right in. It hit the bottom with a sickening thud. "It's junk, Joshua. Get this out of my sight. And take the trash out while you're at it." The caterers left a mess. Elijah, who was leaning casually against the marble kitchen island, let out a sharp, mocking laugh. He was wearing a custom-tailored suit that he had charged to Grandpa's credit card just 3 days before the funeral. He tilted his crystal flute, and a stream of sticky, golden champagne splashed down directly into the trash can, soaking the spine of the book. "Oops," Elijah smirked, his eyes practically dancing with malicious joy. "My hand slipped. Better clean that up, little brother. We have real estate agents coming tomorrow to look at the property." My nails dug so hard into my palms I felt the skin break. To them, I wasn't family. I was furniture, a stepping stone. I stood there, swallowing the massive lump of grief and rage blocking my throat. I didn't say a word. I just waited. I waited until they moved out to the back patio to smoke cigars and discuss their grand plans for the money they assumed was coming to them. The moment the glass patio door slid shut, I dropped to my knees. I reached into the garbage, pushing aside half-eaten hors d'oeuvres and crumpled napkins, and pulled the book out. I grabbed a clean dish towel and frantically wiped down the damp, champagne-soaked leather. My hands were shaking uncontrollably. As I opened the heavy cover to check if the pages were water-damaged, my breath hitched. The book felt wrong. It was too light in the center. I flipped past the title page. The center pages weren't pages at all. They had been meticulously hollowed out, cut into a perfect rectangular compartment. And tucked safely inside that hidden space was a thick, folded document sealed in a protective plastic sleeve. I pulled it out. My eyes scanned the bold lettering at the top of the page, followed by a gold notary seal. It was the original, fully notarized last will and testament of Nicholas Vance. Eleanor thought she was throwing away garbage. She thought she was establishing dominance. But as I read the first paragraph of that document, a cold, calculating calm washed over me. Little did they know, they hadn't just thrown away a book. They had handed me the exact weapon I was going to use to destroy them. To understand why I didn't run out to the patio screaming, waving that piece of paper in their faces, and demanding they leave my house, you have to understand the absolute nightmare of the last 10 years. You have to understand how deeply the poison ran in my family. It all started with the divorce. When I was 18, my father finally had enough of Eleanor's endless spending, her narcissistic rages, and her blatant infidelity. He packed his bags and left, moving across the country and cutting all ties. But instead of reflecting on her actions, Eleanor turned her heart to solid ice. She needed someone to blame, and she needed someone to worship her. She split her remaining family right down the middle. Elijah became the golden child, the one who could do absolutely no wrong. He was the handsome, charming older brother who was destined for greatness. I, on the other hand, became the scapegoat, the punching bag. Because I looked like my father, I was treated with constant, simmering hostility. While I spent my high school and college years working grueling late-night shifts at a local diner just to pay for my own textbooks and cheap ramen, Elijah lived like a king. He blew through his entire massive college fund in just 3 semesters at a prestigious out-of-state university. He spent it on frat parties, designer clothes, and VIP tables at upscale clubs. When the money ran out, he dropped out, moved back into our grandfather's house, and demanded a lifestyle he had never earned. Elijah didn't have a job. He didn't even have a basic salary to speak of. His full-time occupation was draining my grandfather's retirement accounts while treating me like a personal maid. He constantly complained that his life was too hard, that society didn't appreciate his genius, and that he desperately needed a Ferrari just to match his entrepreneurial status and impress potential investors. Investors for what I never knew. I was working an entry-level corporate job, putting in 60-hour weeks. But I never once got a promotion. You know why? Because I was always rushing home to cook their dinners, clean their messes, and run their errands. If I had to stay late at the office, Eleanor would blow up my phone, screaming that I was selfish and ungrateful. She would remind me daily that I was lucky she allowed me to sleep under her roof. But here was the twisted reality. It wasn't her roof. It was Grandpa Nicholas's roof. He built that house from the ground up in the 1970s. He paid the property taxes. He paid the utility bills. And when his health started failing, when the arthritis crept into his bones and his heart started giving out, Eleanor and Elijah didn't lift a single finger. I was the one who changed his bandages. I was the one who managed his complex medication schedule. I was the one who took him to endless doctor appointments, sacrificing my own career and personal life. And I was the one who sat with him in the quiet, lonely hours of the night, playing endless games of chess by the fireplace. Grandpa knew exactly who they were. His mind was sharp right up until the very end. He saw the rot in Eleanor. He saw the lazy, insatiable greed consuming Elijah. He used to move his black knight across the chessboard, his hand shaking slightly, look me dead in the eye, and say, "Joshua, listen to me carefully. The loudest player in the room is usually the weakest. They rely on intimidation because they lack strategy. Watch the quiet pieces on the board. The ones that sit back and wait. They are the ones that control the game." I didn't fully understand the weight of those words until I stood in that kitchen, holding the heavy parchment of his final will. I unfolded the document and read the precise, ironclad legal terminology. The words blurred at first, my brain struggling to process the magnitude of what I was holding. But then, the reality came into incredibly sharp focus. My grandfather had left everything to me. Not a percentage. Not a shared trust. Everything. The sprawling estate, the substantial liquid assets, the investment portfolios, the remaining family business shares. It was all securely locked under my name. And right there, on the third page, was a specific, devastating clause. Grandpa had explicitly stated that Eleanor and Elijah were to receive absolutely nothing. The document cited years of documented financial abuse, emotional neglect, and theft from his personal accounts. This piece of paper proved that the property deed Eleanor was currently parading around, the one she was using to try and sell the house to a commercial developer, was a complete and utter forgery. I owned it all. This was my inheritance. My first instinct, the burning, impulsive desire in my chest, was to march out to the patio. I wanted to slam the document down on their glass table, watch their smug faces crumble into dust, and call the police to physically throw them off my property. But I stopped. I stood frozen in the kitchen, looking at the wet, ruined cover of the chess book sitting on the counter. If I walked out there right now, I knew exactly what would happen. Eleanor would lunge at me. She would snatch the paper from my hands with her manicured claws. She would tear it into tiny pieces, throw it in the fireplace, and claim I fabricated the whole thing. Or worse, she would hire a ruthless legal team using Grandpa's stolen money and drag me into a grueling civil dispute. It would be my word against hers in probate court for 5 long years. She would twist the narrative. She would play the grieving widow of my father's family, the devoted daughter-in-law. She had the connections and the sheer audacity to bleed me dry in legal fees until I was forced to settle just to survive. No, civil court wasn't enough. A family squabble over a piece of paper wasn't enough. I didn't just want the house. I wanted total, undeniable justice. I wanted them to feel a fraction of the helplessness they had inflicted on me for a decade. I carefully folded the will back along its original creases, slid it perfectly into its protective plastic sleeve, and walked quietly upstairs to my small bedroom. I hid it deep inside the lining of an old duffel bag buried in the back of my closet. I realized in that exact moment that my silence was infinitely more dangerous than my voice. If I stayed quiet, if I let them believe they successfully forged the deed and owned the house, their bottomless greed would eventually force them to make a fatal mistake. They would try to turn that fake ownership into fast, liquid cash to fund their delusional lifestyles. And the moment they signed a legally binding financial contract using a property they didn't legally own, the game changed entirely. It wasn't a messy family dispute anymore. It was institutional fraud. I walked back downstairs, wiped the kitchen counter until it gleamed, put on my usual apron, and walked out to the patio to collect their empty champagne glasses. I looked at my mother, who didn't even bother to make eye contact with me. I smiled softly to myself. I was finally ready to play the long game. 2 agonizing weeks passed. I played my part perfectly, moving through the house like a ghost, cleaning up their messes, and listening from the shadows. And just as I predicted, the trap began to close. I was in the sunroom one Tuesday afternoon, polishing the massive bay windows, completely invisible to the 2 people arguing furiously behind me. Eleanor was pacing back and forth across the hardwood floor, her designer heels clicking aggressively, echoing like a ticking time bomb. The grand sale of the house had hit a massive, immovable snag. A major commercial developer named Wyatt, a guy who built luxury condos and measured the world in profit margins, had suddenly backed out of the purchase. He claimed the title search was dragging on and the estate records were too old, dating back to the 1970s. But I knew the real truth. Before he died, Grandpa had legally restricted the property boundaries with the city council, establishing a historical preservation clause for the main structure and the gardens. It made it absolutely impossible for Wyatt to bulldoze the property and build his high-rise. The deal was completely dead. But Eleanor couldn't wait for a new, residential buyer. The facade of her wealthy lifestyle was cracking, and it was cracking fast. She had heavy, dangerous debts that she thought no one in the family knew about. Massive, staggering gambling losses from weekend trips to Atlantic City, maxed out credit cards, and a lifestyle that required $10,000 a month just to maintain the illusion of high society. "I need the cash right now, Elijah," Eleanor hissed, her voice trembling with barely suppressed panic. She threw a threatening, red-stamped letter from a major creditor onto the antique desk. "They are threatening to freeze my bank accounts by the end of the month. If the country club finds out my cards are declining, I'll be a laughingstock." Elijah was lounging on the velvet sofa, his feet propped up on the coffee table, completely unfazed. He was casually scrolling through his phone, probably looking at luxury car listings. "So, get a bridge loan, Mom. A hard money loan," Elijah said smoothly, not even looking up from his screen. "I know a guy named Carter. He's a private broker. He doesn't ask too many annoying questions about title history or credit scores. As long as you have the physical deed in your hand and a willing notary to stamp it." I scrubbed a smudge on the glass in front of me, pressing hard to keep my hands from shaking. My heart rate was spiking so fast I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. "What are the terms?" Eleanor asked, stopping her pacing and looking at Elijah with hungry eyes. "High interest. Aggressive repayment structure," Elijah shrugged, finally putting his phone down. "But who cares? We pay it off in 6 months when we finally find another buyer for this dump. It's just a stopgap. Plus, I need my cut immediately." The dealership called. "They have a pristine Porsche 911 on the lot, and if I don't put a massive cash down payment on it by next week, someone else is going to take it." A hard money loan. It was fast, it was highly predatory, and it required immediate, unencumbered collateral. It was exactly the kind of reckless, arrogant mistake a desperate person would make when they felt the walls closing in. "How much can we get?" Eleanor asked, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. $500,000, Elijah replied confidently. "Cash wire transfer. Immediate disbursement into your account the second the ink dries on the contract." I could literally see the toxic greed wash over my mother's face in the reflection of the window. It smoothed out her worry lines, replacing her panic with pure, unadulterated arrogance. She didn't hesitate for a single second. She didn't think about the risks. She didn't think about the law. "Do it," Eleanor commanded. "Call Carter right now. Set the signing up for this Friday." They were going to do it. They were going to use my house, my grandfather's legacy, as collateral for a $500,000 loan from a shadow broker. They were going to sit down with a notary and sign official, legally binding financial documents claiming, under penalty of perjury, that they were the sole, undisputed owners of the estate. They assumed I was too stupid to understand what collateral meant. They assumed I was just Joshua, the pathetic son who cleaned the windows and made the coffee. I finished the last pane of glass, picked up my heavy bucket of soapy water, and walked out of the sunroom without making a single sound. I didn't rush. I didn't run. I walked with purpose. I went straight to the laundry room at the back of the house, locked the heavy wooden door behind me, and sat down on a stool. I pulled out my cell phone and dialed a specific number I had memorized from my grandfather's private address book years ago. The phone rang twice before it was picked up. "Samuel?" I whispered, keeping my voice incredibly low. Samuel was Grandpa Nicholas's most trusted attorney, his oldest friend, and the executor of the real estate trust. He was a brilliant, no-nonsense lawyer who had been waiting for my signal ever since the funeral. "Joshua." Samuel's deep, gravelly voice came through the receiver. It was calm, steady, and immensely comforting. "I was wondering when you'd finally call. What is the situation?" "It's happening," I said, staring at the spinning drum of the dryer. "They couldn't sell the house to Wyatt. The title was too messy, so they're taking out a fraudulent mortgage on the property. A hard money loan for $500,000. They are doing the signing here at the house this Friday morning." There was a long, heavy pause on the line. I could hear Samuel shifting papers on his desk. "Are you absolutely sure about this, son?" Samuel asked, his tone turning dead serious. "We discussed the implications of this. Once they physically sign those federal loan documents, and once that wire transfer clears into her bank account, there is no going back. That is wire fraud. That is bank fraud. That is a major federal felony. They will not just get a slap on the wrist. Your mother will go to federal prison for years. I looked up from the floor and stared at my own reflection in the dark, circular glass of the washing machine door. I looked for the frightened, submissive boy Eleanor had bullied and tormented for over a decade. He wasn't there anymore. Staring back at me was a man whose eyes were cold, calculated, and completely empty of mercy. I saw Nicholas Vance's grandson. "I know exactly what it means, Samuel," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but harder than steel. "They made their choice a long time ago. Let them sign the papers. Just make sure you are here on Friday." "I'll have the authorities ready at the end of your street," Samuel confirmed. "Stay entirely out of sight, Joshua. Let them dig their own grave." I hung up the phone. Friday was 3 days away. For 3 days, I had to act perfectly normal while carrying a secret that was about to detonate my entire family. Friday morning arrived, bringing with it a heavy, suffocating silence that settled over the house like a thick fog. It felt exactly like the atmosphere in a courtroom right before a massive verdict is read by the jury. The air was incredibly tense. I had spent the early hours of the morning aggressively scrubbing the kitchen floors, polishing the silver, and making myself look incredibly busy. I needed them to see me as part of the background, a mindless drone performing chores. If they saw me standing still watching them, they might remember I actually existed as a human being. They might suddenly realize I was a potential threat to their plan. At exactly 10 o'clock in the morning, the heavy brass doorbell rang. It wasn't the police. Not yet. I opened the door to find Carter, the hard money loan officer. He was a small, weaselly man wearing a suit that looked expensive but fit incredibly poorly. He clutched a thick leather briefcase to his chest and had the shifty, nervous eyes of a guy who made his entire living profiting off the desperation and greed of others. He was followed closely by Chloe, a stern-faced notary public. She wore a sensible gray blazer and carried a heavy metal stamp in her hand like a weapon. "We are here to see Eleanor Vance," Carter said, barely glancing at me. "Right this way," I replied, stepping aside and gesturing toward the grand library. They set up their operation inside the library, spreading massive stacks of legal contracts, disclosures, and promissory notes across my grandfather's antique mahogany desk. It was the exact same desk where Grandpa used to sit me on his knee and teach me the intricate strategies of chess on rainy Sunday afternoons. Felt like a desecration. Now, his desk was being used as the staging ground to sell off his legacy to a loan shark. I walked into the kitchen, prepared a silver tray with fresh, steaming coffee, cream, and expensive biscuits, and carried it back into the library. I kept my eyes completely downcast, playing the role of the subservient servant perfectly, placing the tray carefully on the side table. Eleanor and Elijah were already in the room. They had dressed up for the occasion. Eleanor was wearing a tailored Chanel suit, her hair perfectly styled, looking every bit the wealthy matriarch she was pretending to be. Elijah was wearing another custom suit, his chest puffed out with unearned arrogance. Eleanor didn't even acknowledge my presence as I poured the coffee. She was entirely focused on Carter's glowing laptop screen, her eyes wide with a ravenous hunger. "So," Eleanor said, her voice tight with anticipation, gripping the edge of the mahogany desk. "Once I sign these documents, the funds are released immediately?" Carter tapped a few keys on his laptop, bringing up a banking portal. "That is correct, Mrs. Vance. As soon as Chloe here notarizes the deed of trust and the promissory note, I will personally authorize the wire transfer on this screen. It is an immediate disbursement protocol. You will see the $500,000 hit your checking account within 10 to 15 minutes. But I must remind you, the interest rate on this bridge loan is incredibly aggressive. If you miss a single payment—" "We won't miss a payment," Elijah interrupted sharply, leaning aggressively over Carter's shoulder. He smelled of cheap cologne and desperation. "The property is being sold to a major commercial developer next month for 3 times its value. This is just a temporary bridge to cover some liquid assets. We have massive equity in this estate. Don't worry about your money. He was lying through his teeth, and we all knew it. The developer had already backed out permanently. They weren't borrowing money to bridge a financial gap. They were borrowing money to run away from their creditors. They were cashing out a massive stack of chips they didn't actually own before the casino realized the chips were entirely fake. Standard procedure, Carter said, ignoring Elijah and sliding a massive, 2-inch thick stack of legal documents toward Eleanor. I need your signature here, here, and here, and I need you to initial the bottom of page 4, which is the sworn affidavit stating you are the sole, unencumbered legal owner of this property. I poured the coffee as slowly as humanly possible, making the simple task last. I needed to witness this. I needed to see the exact moment the crime moved from a desperate thought into a physical federal action. Eleanor reached across the desk and picked up the heavy brass pen. I held my breath. I watched her hand. It didn't shake. She didn't hesitate for a single microsecond. That was the most terrifying part of all of this. She felt absolutely no guilt. She didn't look up at the massive oil portrait of her father-in-law, Nicholas, hanging directly above the fireplace, judging her. She didn't look at me, her own flesh and blood, standing quietly in the corner. She just pressed the tip of the pen to the crisp paper and signed her name with an elegant flourish. Eleanor Vance, owner. She signed the loan application. She signed the heavy deed of trust. She signed the sworn affidavit of ownership, lying directly to a financial institution. With every scratch of the ink on that paper, she was actively digging a massive grave that she could never, ever climb out of. This wasn't just lying to family anymore. This was lying to a federally insured entity. This was wire fraud. Chloe, the notary, pulled the papers toward her. She meticulously checked the fake state identification Eleanor had placed on the table, verifying the name and face. Then, she picked up her heavy metal stamp. Thud. She stamped the documents. The sound echoed in the quiet, high-ceilinged library like a gunshot. It was done. The lie was now a legally binding document, recorded in ink and sealed by the state. Congratulations, Mrs. Vance, Carter said. A greasy, satisfied smile spreading across his face. He typed a final command into his laptop and hit the enter key. I am initiating the wire transfer right now. I picked up the empty silver cream pitcher, turned on my heel, and walked out of the library and into the long hallway. My heart was pounding a frantic, deafening rhythm against my ribs, but my face remained completely carved from stone. I reached deep into the pocket of my apron, pulled out my cell phone, and tapped the screen to wake it up. I was already on an active, muted call with Samuel. He had been listening to the entire thing. A cheerful, high-pitched chime broke the silence from the library. Came from Carter's laptop. Transfer complete, Carter announced loudly. $500,000 successfully wired to the account of Eleanor Vance. Eleanor let out a sound that was half a hysterical laugh, half a sob of pure relief. She grabbed Elijah's arm, her eyes wild with triumph and greed. We did it, Elijah. We're rich. We are finally free of this place. Elijah was already aggressively dialing a number on his phone. I told you it was easy money, Mom. I'm calling the dealership right now. That Porsche is coming home today. I stepped back into the doorway of the library, standing tall, my thumb hovering directly over the unmute button on my phone screen. Mom, I said, my voice trembling slightly, playing the role of the confused, pathetic son one last time. So, the money is actually in your bank account? You officially mortgaged the house. Eleanor spun around, her face instantly twisting back into that familiar, vicious sneer. She looked at me like I was a stain she couldn't scrub out of her expensive carpet. Yes, Joshua, she spat, venom dripping from every word. The money is mine. The house is mine. Now get out of my sight before I call security to throw you out into the street. You have until tomorrow morning to pack your pathetic bags and leave my property. My trembling stopped immediately. I squared my shoulders, and the facade dropped completely. I don't think I'll be packing anything, Mom, I said, my voice dropping an octave, ringing loud and clear in the room. I unmuted the phone. Did you get all of that, Samuel? Loud and clear, Joshua. The lawyer's deep voice crackled loudly through the phone's speaker for everyone in the room to hear. Step away from the front door. I stepped back. The heavy oak front door didn't just open. It burst inward with terrifying force. For heavily armed federal agents wearing dark blue FBI windbreakers swarmed into the hallway. They moved with the terrifying, coordinated precision of a sledgehammer, storming straight into the library. They were led by Special Agent Lincoln, a massive, imposing man who looked like he hadn't smiled in a decade, followed closely by Samuel and an assistant district attorney. Federal agents. Agent Lincoln shouted, his voice vibrating off the walls and shattering the silence. Step away from the desk. Keep your hands where I can see them. The room instantly dissolved into absolute chaos. Eleanor screamed a blood-curdling shriek, dropping her porcelain coffee cup. It shattered into a dozen pieces, splashing dark, hot liquid all over her expensive Chanel shoes. Elijah scrambled backward in sheer terror, tripping over the legs of his own chair and crashing heavily to the hardwood floor. What is the meaning of this? Eleanor shrieked, pointing a violently shaking finger at the armed agents. Who are you? Get out of my house this instant. It's not your house, Eleanor, I said, walking slowly and deliberately right into the center of the room. I reached inside my jacket and pulled out the thick plastic sleeve. I slid Grandpa's real, original will out and slapped it down onto the mahogany desk, right on top of her fraudulent loan documents. This is Grandpa Nicholas's original will. Fully notarized, legally registered, and absolutely clear, I said, staring directly into her terrified eyes. I turned and pointed at her. My grandfather left everything to me. My mother and brother just used a property they do not legally own to secure a $500,000 federal loan. The money just cleared into her account. That is wire fraud. That is bank fraud. The realization hit the room like a physical shockwave. But the best reaction didn't come from Eleanor. Came from Carter. The loan officer looked from the FBI badges, down to the real will on the desk and back to Eleanor. All the blood completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a corpse. He realized in real time that he had just facilitated a massive federal felony. She told me the title was clean, Carter yelled in sheer panic, grabbing his laptop and holding it up toward the agents like a shield. I have the emails. She swore she had the deed. I am not going to federal prison for this crazy woman. You can explain your due diligence to the federal judge, an agent said coldly, snatching the laptop right out of his hands. Agent Lincoln stepped purposefully toward Eleanor. She jerked back, hitting the bookshelf, her eyes wide with sudden, suffocating terror. No, wait. Don't touch me. I am Eleanor Vance. This is my house. This is a massive misunderstanding. Eleanor Vance, Agent Lincoln said evenly, grabbing her wrist, spinning her around forcefully, and locking heavy steel cuffs around her wrists. You are under arrest for wire fraud, bank fraud, and aggravated identity theft. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Click. That sound. The sharp, metallic click of the handcuffs locking into place. It was better than the $500,000. It was better than owning the massive house. It was the beautiful, satisfying sound of consequences finally arriving after 10 long years of abuse. Eleanor stared at me over her shoulder like she was looking at an alien. Her mouth fell open, her eyes wide with shock, and then she spat. You little bastard. The truth is incredibly patient, Mom, I said, my voice cold and steady, devoid of any sympathy. And your time just ran out. This is a moment that changed everything, when I finally regained control of my life. Thank you for your patience in getting this far. You are amazing. Please help me like the video and leave a comment with the number 1 below so I know you've been with me this far. This will not only help more people find this story, but also let me know that my experiences are meaningful to someone. Your support is the biggest motivation for me to continue sharing the rest of this journey. As the agents grabbed Eleanor by the arms and began marching her toward the front door, I exhaled a breath I felt like I had been holding for my entire adult life. It was finally over. The house was safe. The monster was in chains. But I forgot one crucial rule about dealing with narcissists. They never fight fair, and they fight the hardest when they are cornered. Wait. Stop right there. Officers. Elijah's voice rang out from the corner of the room. It wasn't panicked anymore. It wasn't the voice of a man whose mother had just been arrested. It was smooth, calculated, almost bored. He stood up slowly, brushed the dust off his expensive trousers, and opened his leather briefcase like an actor who had been waiting patiently for his cue. You are arresting the wrong person. My mother is acting under my explicit legal authority. Agent Lincoln stopped, narrowing his eyes at my brother. Back off, son. Do not interfere with an active federal arrest. I'm not interfering. I'm correcting a severe legal error. Elijah sneered, walking forward. He pulled out a thick document stamped with a heavy, bright red official county seal and practically shoved it into Lincoln's chest. My younger brother, Joshua, lacks the legal mental capacity to accuse anyone of anything. As of 9 o'clock this morning, I was granted full emergency legal custody of him and his entire estate. The room temperature plummeted to absolute zero. My blood ran cold. Agent Lincoln scanned the front page of the document, his heavy brow furrowing in confusion. What exactly is this? An ex parte emergency guardianship order. Severe paranoid delusions, memory fabrication, and a documented, violent history of planting false evidence against family members. Elijah announced loudly to the room, his voice dripping with fake, sickening sympathy. He turned to me, a cruel, mocking smile plastered on his face. It's okay, little brother. You're just having another one of your manic episodes. We're going to get you the psychiatric help you so desperately need. My stomach hit the floor. This was his masterstroke. This was his backup plan. He had secretly petitioned a corrupt county judge to declare me mentally incompetent. If I was legally insane, my testimony to the FBI was completely void. The will I had just produced would be considered highly suspect and tied up in litigation for years. He was trying to lock me in a psychiatric ward, drug me into silence so he could take over the estate and sell the house while I couldn't fight back. Agent Lincoln looked from the court order to me, then to Eleanor's handcuffs. He hesitated. A sitting judge's signature carried massive legal weight, even for the FBI. Sir, Lincoln said, turning to Samuel, clearly conflicted. This order is signed by Judge Miller. It grants immediate, temporary legal custody of Joshua Vance to his brother, Elijah. We might have a serious jurisdictional issue here. If he is not competent, this will is in dispute. Eleanor stopped struggling against the agents holding her. A cruel, triumphant smile spread across her face, replacing her terror. I told you, officer, she hissed at me, her eyes practically glowing with malice. You're sick, Joshua. You've always been sick in the head. For 10 agonizing seconds, the only sound in the room was the heavy ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. I felt the walls physically closing in on me. They were going to win. They were going to throw me in an asylum and steal everything. But then I looked over at Samuel. The old lawyer didn't look worried. He didn't look panicked. He looked absolutely bored. Agent Lincoln, Samuel said, stepping squarely between Elijah and the federal agent, his presence commanding the room. Before you honor a fraudulent ex parte order, I strongly suggest you read the specific addendum attached to Nicholas Vance's will. Clause 14, subsection B. We affectionately call it the competency trap. Elijah scoffed loudly, crossing his arms. A dead man's will doesn't override a living judge's court order, old man. You have no power here. It does when the court order in question was obtained through blatant perjury and forged medical documents. Samuel snapped, his voice cracking like a whip. He reached into his own briefcase and pulled a pristine white folder. Nicholas anticipated your greed, Elijah. He knew you would try something exactly like this. The clause explicitly states that any family member who challenges the primary beneficiary's mental state must submit to a sworn polygraph test, and the accuser must prove incapacity with a current, state-certified medical evaluation. "We have an evaluation," Elijah barked, waving a piece of paper frantically. Dr. Schwartz signed a sworn medical affidavit just yesterday morning stating Joshua is a danger to himself. "Ah, yes, Dr. Schwartz." Samuel smiled a thin, razor-sharp smile. The exact same Dr. Schwartz who permanently lost his medical license in the state of Florida for massive insurance fraud? "Very interesting choice of physician, Elijah, because we happen to have an evaluation too." Samuel handed a thick, officially bound medical file directly to Agent Lincoln. "My client Joshua voluntarily completed a full, comprehensive forensic psychiatric evaluation exactly 48 hours ago. It was conducted personally by Dr. Andrew, the chief state psychiatrist for the medical board. The results? Sound mind, superior intelligence, and fully capable of managing his own estate without any interference whatsoever." Agent Lincoln compared the two documents side by side. On one hand, a shaky, rushed affidavit from a discredited hack used to secretly steal custody. On the other, a pristine, ironclad 60-page medical clearance from the highest-ranking psychiatric official in the entire state. I looked at my brother, my voice cutting through the dead silence of the room. "Grandpa was always 3 moves ahead of you on the chessboard, Elijah. He didn't just leave me his money. He left me an impenetrable shield." Agent Lincoln's hesitation vanished instantly. His eyes turned dark, and a vein pulsed in his neck as he glared at my brother. "Did you knowingly use a fraudulent medical affidavit to lie to a county judge to obtain this legal order?" Lincoln demanded. "Because that is perjury. That is obstruction of justice." Elijah's smug smirk completely collapsed. The color drained from his face as he stared at Samuel's document like it was coated in poison. He started backing away. I didn't know." The doctor said, "Mom told me to do it." "Turn around," Lincoln ordered, stepping aggressively toward Elijah. "Hands behind your back right now." "No." Elijah stumbled backward, crashing into the heavy desk again. "You can't do this. I'm his legal guardian. I have rights. I need a lawyer." The second pair of handcuffs snapped shut, echoing sharply in the room and violently ending his pathetic, desperate speech. "You're not a guardian, Elijah," I said quietly, watching as the agents dragged him toward the door, right next to our mother, who was now openly weeping. "You're just another pawn." The front door clicked shut behind the last federal agent, and for the first time in 10 years, the house was completely silent. It wasn't that heavy, suffocating silence of walking on eggshells, terrified of waking my mother or setting off my brother's explosive temper. It was the pure, unadulterated silence of true peace. I stood in the middle of the grand hallway and just listened to it. No aggressive clicking of designer heels on the hardwood floor. No condescending demands shouted from the sunroom. Just the steady, rhythmic ticking of my grandfather's antique clock. I walked slowly back into the library. The room was a complete disaster zone. My mother's shattered porcelain coffee cup lay in pieces across the expensive Persian rug, the dark liquid seeping into the intricate woven fibers. A chair was overturned where Elijah had tripped in his blind panic. The fraudulent loan documents were still scattered across the mahogany desk, left behind as useless garbage now that the FBI had thoroughly photographed and documented the scene. I picked up the overturned chair. I grabbed a towel from the kitchen and carefully blotted the spilled coffee from the rug. I moved with a strange, floating sensation. The adrenaline that had been keeping me upright for the past 72 hours was finally draining away, leaving behind a profound sense of exhaustion, but also a crystal-clear sense of purpose. The next morning, I drove to the downtown legal district to meet with Samuel at his firm. Sitting in his plush leather guest chair, drinking coffee that didn't taste like anxiety, we went over the wreckage of my family's legal standing. Samuel laid out the exact reality of the situation. The hard money loan from Carter was entirely dead on arrival. Banks and private brokers absolutely do not enforce financial contracts tied directly to federal felonies, especially when the collateral used was definitively proven to be stolen. Carter's firm was currently under a massive federal microscope, and they dropped all claims to our property the second the FBI walked through their doors. The title to the estate was clean. The inheritance was secure. Everything Grandpa Nicholas had built was legally, morally, and completely mine. They are currently sitting in the county holding facility awaiting federal arraignment, Samuel explained, adjusting his glasses. Because Eleanor used the federal wire system to receive that $500,000, and because Elijah committed blatant perjury with that forged custody document, the district attorney is showing absolutely no mercy. Their assets are frozen. All of those credit cards your mother relied on, cut off. The bank accounts she drained from your grandfather, seized as evidence. A week later, I actually went to the federal courthouse for their bail hearing. I didn't go to support them. I went because I needed to see it with my own eyes to believe it was real. I sat in the very back row of the gallery, wearing a simple gray suit. When the heavy wooden doors of the holding area opened, the breath caught in my throat. Eleanor and Elijah were led out by armed marshals, both wearing standard-issue orange jumpsuits. Their wrists were bound by heavy metal chains that clinked loudly in the quiet courtroom. My mother looked entirely unrecognizable. Without her expensive salon blowouts, her thick layers of makeup, and her tailored Chanel suits, she just looked like a small, terrified, very ordinary woman. The arrogant matriarch who had ruled my life with an iron fist was completely gone. Elijah looked even worse. The smug, entitled golden boy who demanded a luxury sports car without working a single day in his life was visibly shaking. He kept looking around the courtroom, his eyes darting frantically, searching for a lifeline that simply did not exist. The judge was a stern, uncompromising woman who had absolutely zero patience for white-collar criminals who tried to steal from their own families. She looked down at the prosecutor's file, then looked directly at my mother. "Mrs. Vance," the judge said, her voice echoing through the massive room. "You orchestrated a complex scheme to defraud a financial institution, and you actively attempted to strip your youngest son of his legal rights to cover your tracks. Given your massive, unsecured gambling debts and your clear lack of moral restraint, I consider you a severe flight risk." The judge slammed her gavel down. "Bail is denied. Both defendants will be remanded to federal custody pending trial." Eleanor's knees buckled. A marshal had to physically catch her by the arm to keep her from collapsing onto the floor. She turned her head as they dragged her away, and her eyes found mine in the back row. She didn't look angry anymore. She looked utterly broken. But I didn't feel a single ounce of pity. You cannot mourn the destruction of a prison warden when you are the one who just escaped the cell. 6 months passed. The seasons changed, and so did the house. The stale smell of cheap champagne, expensive cologne, and toxic resentment was entirely gone. I opened every single window in the estate, letting the crisp, salty ocean breeze sweep through the hallways. I hired a professional crew, and together, we ripped out the dark, heavy drapes Eleanor had installed. We tore down the gaudy, patterned wallpaper she loved so much and painted the walls a bright, clean, reflecting white. I didn't sell the estate. It would have been incredibly easy. Wyatt, the commercial developer, even called Samuel with a significantly higher cash offer once the legal dust settled. I could have taken the money, bought a penthouse in the city, and lived the rest of my life in absolute, unbothered luxury. But Grandpa Nicholas didn't leave me this massive property just so I could cash out and disappear. He left it to me to make a point. He left it to me because he knew I understood the true value of a safe harbor. I took a large portion of the liquid inheritance and started a massive renovation project on the east wing of the estate. That wing used to be Eleanor's massive suite and Elijah's sprawling recreation room. We gutted it down to the studs. We built 5 separate, beautiful, fully furnished studio apartments. We installed a commercial-grade community kitchen, a bright, sunlit playroom for children, and a secure, gated entrance. By the following spring, it was no longer just a sprawling suburban estate. It officially opened as the Nicholas Vance Sanctuary. It is a transitional, high-security housing facility designed specifically for women and families who are actively escaping severe financial abuse. Financial abuse is the invisible chain that keeps people locked in living nightmares. When a narcissistic partner or a toxic family member controls the bank accounts, destroys your credit score, or sabotages your career, you cannot simply pack a bag and walk out the door. You have nowhere to go. You have no resources. I knew exactly what that felt like. I remembered working 60-hour weeks, handing over my salary just to keep the peace, and staring at my empty bank account while my brother bought designer watches. I took the terrible, suffocating prison my mother built and transformed it into an impenetrable fortress for people who felt exactly like I used to feel. We provide free legal counsel, financial literacy classes, and a safe, beautiful place to sleep while they rebuild their shattered lives. The very first family that moved into the sanctuary was a young mother with 2 little girls. Her husband had secretly drained their savings, put massive loans in her name, and isolated her from her friends. When she walked into the freshly painted apartment, looked at the safe, clean beds, and realized she didn't owe anyone a single dime to be there, she broke down in tears in the middle of the hallway. I handed her the keys, looked her in the eye, and told her exactly what I wish someone had told me 10 years ago. You are not invisible. You are safe now, and nobody can ever take this space away from you. That single moment was worth more than every dollar in my grandfather's bank account. My own life transformed entirely. I quit my dead-end corporate job, the one where I was constantly passed over for a promotion because I was too exhausted from serving my family. I now run the sanctuary full-time as the director. I work directly with lawyers, social workers, and city planners. I built a life that I am fiercely proud of, entirely on my own terms. But ghosts from the past still try to rattle their chains. Every Tuesday evening, exactly at 6 o'clock, my cell phone buzzes. The caller ID always reads the same thing. Inmate call, Federal Correctional Institution. Eleanor calls almost weekly. Sometimes, Elijah tries to call from his separate facility. I know exactly what they want because Samuel still monitors their legal correspondence. They want money deposited into their prison commissary accounts. They want to explain their side of the story. They want to cry, beg, and ultimately they want to blame me for ruining their lives. I sit at the heavy mahogany desk in the library, the same desk where my grandfather signed his will, the same desk where my mother signed her own arrest warrant. I look at the glowing screen of my phone. I don't feel anger anymore. I don't feel the burning rage that used to keep me awake at night. I don't argue with them. I don't pick up the phone to scream or demand apologies that will never, ever be genuine. I simply open my contacts. I tap the name Eleanor Vance, and I hit the button that says, Block Caller. Then I do the exact same thing for Elijah. I didn't just inherit a massive house, a healthy stock portfolio, and a bank account from Grandpa Nicholas. I inherited my self-worth. I inherited my dignity. I inherited the absolute, undeniable right to look toxic people in the eye and say the word, no. They thought I was incredibly weak just because I was quiet. They thought I was stupid because I poured their coffee, cleaned their windows, and ironed their shirts while they sat in the sunroom and plotted how to steal my future. But they completely forgot the most important lesson Grandpa ever taught me. It is a quiet Sunday morning. The sun is just starting to rise over the ocean, casting a brilliant, warm golden light across the manicured lawns of the estate. I am standing out on the master balcony, feeling the cool, salty wind blow through my hair. In my hand, I am holding a delicate, incredibly expensive bone china teacup. It is the exact cup from Eleanor's prized, untouchable collection. The one she kept locked away behind a glass cabinet. The one she viciously screamed at me for accidentally touching when I was 12 years old, telling me I wasn't worthy of holding something so valuable. I take a long, slow sip of Earl Grey tea. Tastes absolutely incredible. I turn around and walk back inside the house, moving down the sweeping staircase and stepping into the restored library. The dark stains on the rug are gone. The oppressive energy is completely eradicated. It is a room of learning, strategy, and peace now. Sitting in the exact center of the mahogany desk is Grandpa Nicholas's beautiful, hand-carved wooden chessboard. I set up the pieces exactly the way we left them on our very last game together before his health failed. The polished wooden knights, bishops, and rooks standing at attention in the morning light. Except I made one small, permanent change to the board. I reached out and completely removed 2 of the black pawns from the playing field. I dropped them into the trash bin. They aren't part of the game anymore. I traced my finger over the top of the white king. In the game of chess, the loudest pieces on the board are usually just distractions. The pieces that move the fastest, the ones that aggressively attack without a solid plan, are always the first to be captured. The truly dangerous pieces are the quiet ones. The ones that sit back, observe the entire board, and patiently set the trap. You don't always have to flip the table, scream at the top of your lungs, or fight a bully on their own terms to win the game. Sometimes, true power is absolute silence. You just have to build an impenetrable defense, hold your ground, and wait for your opponent's arrogance to force them into making the wrong move. I take one more sip from the china cup, look out at the bright, clear horizon stretching over the water, and then look back down at the board. Checkmate, Grandpa. I whisper to the empty room. If there is one thing I want you to take away from my story today, it is this: family is not simply defined by blood. Blood only makes you related. Loyalty, respect, and mutual care are what actually make you family. For years, I allowed myself to be entirely consumed by the toxic guilt that because they were my mother and brother, I owed them my sanity, my salary, and my future. I thought enduring their abuse was a sign of strength and loyalty. But setting boundaries is not an act of betrayal. It is an act of sheer survival. When you are dealing with deeply manipulative people who view you not as a human being, but as a resource to be exploited, your silence and your absence are the most powerful weapons you possess. You cannot heal in the exact same environment that broke you. Walking away from toxic family members does not make you a bad person. It makes you a person who finally respects yourself enough to demand better. I want to hear from you now. Have you ever had to draw a hard line and cut ties with someone toxic in your own life to protect your peace? What was the breaking point that made you finally walk away? Share your experiences in the comments below. Or, if you simply agree that setting strong boundaries is the key to a healthy life, drop the word "good" in the comments right now so I know this message resonated with you. Thank you for spending your time with me today, for listening to my journey, and for being part of this incredible community. Stay strong, protect your peace, and I will see you in the next video.